Hey everybody, Saul Goodman here. It's been a while since old Lolster uploaded. Well, I'm here to inform you all that he's been dealing with terrible equipment issues. And not because he was watching anime and playing Final Fantasy XVI. He was not procrastinating. And anyone who says otherwise will be met with a lawsuit. That is slander, it is libel, and frankly, the accusation is clearly projection. You are the ones procrastinating, dear sir. Sure, you might point out that he recently bought a new GPU, an NVIDIA 3060 to be exact, and that he has been able to stream on a consistent basis, but you see, you all collectively imagined these things. It's all a hallucination brought about by your rampant drug addiction. You're so busy masturbating to Shoujo Ramune that you lost sight of reality, and you entered into a perfect blue-style delusion that your favorite wholesome YouTuber would neglect his work schedule. How could you accuse a man that offers you affordable shirts at a reasonable price of being lazy? It's the nihilism of this new generation that only sees the worst in people. Loli was not procrastinating. He was fixing those equipment issues, which cannot be described at this time due to issues of national security. But they totally exist, and they are why this video took so long. So now that this issue is cleared up, let's let the big guy start the video. The one that came out on time with zero procrastination involved. Thank you all for listening to this message, and remember, Walter White collects women's farts in a bag he sniffs every night.
Alright, before we get started, this video was a request by one of the wonderful Subscribestar bros, and this guy definitely recommended something interesting, because this is actually one of the earliest examples of a found footage film out there. That's right, prepare for a fucking rabbit hole.
That is especially for, check this out now, it's for the men and
'84 Charlie MoPic. So 84 Charlie MoPic, which I will shorten to just 84 Charlie for the sake of convenience, is the 1989 Vietnam found footage war film directed by Patrick Sheen Duncan. It follows a small unit of soldiers performing a long-range reconnaissance mission deep inside of enemy territory during the Vietnam War. All the while, they're being documented by a military journalist referred to as MoPic, his nickname since he's a motion picture specialist. Basically, he records footage of the war and sends it out for news stories and updates on the situation. The title of the film comes from his alphanumeric code for his job, 84C20, Motion Picture Specialist, so 84 Charlie MoPic. So the story of 84 Charlie is really simple. You just kind of watch these guys go through Vietnam, trying to avoid larger conflict and really just stay alive. MoPic occasionally interviews the soldiers to figure out who they are, why they're in the war, and what they want to do with their lives. And by the end it all goes tits up and they're found and are forced to fight to stay alive. Now the most obvious thing to mention is that, well, this is one of the few found footage movies that came out before the Blair Witch, and it's buried in a niche itself. Found footage movies almost always stay firmly in the horror genre, mainly because that's where it got its start. The big noteworthy examples being Cannibal Holocaust, The Last Broadcast, and most famously the Blair Witch Project, the holy trio that formed the identity of what would later be known as the found footage genre, which exploded into the mainstream with stuff like Paranormal Activity and Cloverfield. Blair Witch was a pretty famous movie itself, but the dam cracked when these two hit the theaters. It was, I mean, you just had to be there. Paranormal Activity especially blew up into a way bigger franchise than ever intended, since the first was just a cheap little ghost story filmed for like $15,000. The original Blair Witch was like $60,000, and that flat out became a cultural icon. So as you can see, found footage only really had a home in horror. There are exceptions though. 84 Charlie MoPic is a Vietnam film that never once touches anything supernatural or spooky, and there was even a high school comedy that was found footage, Project X. So it's a style that can be used for other things. If you really want to get technical, Hardcore Henry's kind of a found footage movie. I mean, the main character's a cyborg and you're watching a video feed, so I count it. It's just that most everybody uses it for cheap horror flicks, since it's a genre that can easily be milked into a franchise if it even has a modicum of success, which is the name of the game in horror, so Yeah, makes sense. But the big thing that separates good found footage films and bad ones is something I feel is interesting to talk about. Most people write off found footage as a dead gimmick, and they think pretty much anything coming out that uses it is just trying to swipe money from curious suckers, and they're not completely wrong, but there still are hidden gems buried underneath the mountain of bad college film projects that happen to find a spot on Amazon. 84 Charlie wasn't a cheap cash grab, not at all. It was cheap, but the movie came out before the gimmick was ever really in the public consciousness. It's a genuine attempt to try a new style to tell a story. The director himself was influenced by some of his experiences in Vietnam. Since Patrick Sheen Duncan did a lot of military projects, he did 2 miniseries, Vietnam War Story and Vietnam War Story The Last Days, 84 Charlie MoPic, and Courage Under Fire, the last one taking place during the Gulf War instead of Vietnam though. He did other stuff too that had nothing to do with war stories, but for this video you get the idea. He also wrote a book called Dracula vs. Hitler in 2016. Hellsing. This man just wrote the American version of Hellsing. Anyway, the flaws of 84 Charlie come down to experimenting with a brand new style that nobody really sat down and fleshed out yet. Yeah, you had Cannibal Holocaust in the 70s, which ended up being so famous that the director was accused of using actual snuff footage, even being accused of killing his own actors and just recording it. But since then, there wasn't really any famous found footage movies. Even Cannibal Holocaust only had scenes that were found footage. Most of the film was filmed traditionally, and it was only towards the end did you get the famous stuff. Hell, did you know there were found footage films before Cannibal Holocaust? You had Connection in 1961, which was a story about drug addiction and the dangers of heroin, and was more of a character study drama. There was also David Holtzman's Diary, a mockumentary from 1967 that went on to inspire Coming Apart, which is about a crazy psychiatrist who records sexual escapades with women while he's dealing with a mental breakdown. Special Broadcast in 1983, which was a fake news broadcast about terrorists threatening to detonate a dirty bomb in South Carolina. Guinea Pig Devil's Experiment in 1989, the Japanese snuff film, which a lot of you probably know from Wendigoon's Disturbing Movies video. UFO Abduction, also known as the McPherson tapes from the same year. Man Bites Dog from 1993, which later went on to inspire The Magician, the film that would be adapted into Mr. In-Between. I did a whole video on that. Forgotten Silver, a found footage film from 1995 that Peter Jackson directed, and it's actually a love letter to old school cinema, with a bunch of footage carefully designed to mimic old silent films and stuff you'd see in the 30s. UFO Abduction then got a remake like 9 years later after the first one came out, called Alien Abduction: Incident in Lake County. This is all before the last broadcast, mind you.
They think we're crazy. You're dinky down mad killers. Are you? Yeah, we're the same as killers the Army's got.
So, even though we know found footage as the realm of horror with Blair Witch, The Last Broadcast, Cannibal Holocaust, then later on with Paranormal Activity, really, it kind of was all over the place genre-wise. You had political thrillers, you had science fiction films, and then you had just character studies. Peter Jackson's is more of a mockumentary comedy, and 84 Charlie MoPic is a war film. I wasn't kidding when I said this was a deeper rabbit hole than expected, and it's actually pretty fascinating to think how much has been forgotten in the grander landscape of found footage films, because there are a lot of people convinced the genre began with The Last Broadcast and Cannibal Holocaust. Hell, some don't even know they exist and give credit solely to Blair Witch Project. Sure, not all the films listed are masterpieces. In fact, some of them are pretty fucking cheesy. But the fact they were willing to try a brand new style decades before audiences would understand or accept it is ballsy, and really goes to show that there's more out there to this genre than, cheap horror films. Frankly, 84 Charlie won me over by the concept alone. A found footage war film sounds like a fantastic idea. It's a style that emphasizes the intimacy of the situation. As far as the camera's concerned, everything it's recording is real. It's an active player in the game. So throw that into the chaos of a war movie, and you have potential for some really interesting scenarios, especially since archive footage of actual battles were used in some famous war films, all the way back to the fucking First World War with the Battle of the Somme in 1916. Honestly, it's surprising nobody's tried to recreate the idea since. But then you remember that found footage just sort of fused with horror, and yeah, it makes sense that producers wouldn't take the risk, because that's something I'll definitely say with 84 Charlie. Don't go in expecting a traditional war film. There's not really any large battles or grand spectacles. It's a very slow, character-driven movie. You can count the cast on both your hands. It's about getting to know this unit, how they think and operate, and see how they try to outsmart the Viet Cong. The whole point is they're trying to avoid a gunfight. It's funny when you think about pretty much any other war film where the entire point is the spectacle of watching historical battles play out, or at least, possible scenarios if it's something like Apocalypse Now and it's completely fictional. Hell, just 2 years prior you had Hamburger Hill release, which is a great one, definitely sit down and watch it, but it's a completely different beast from something like 84 Charlie. Still, to go from a film like that to Apocalypse Now, or Platoon, even Full Metal Jacket, it can be a culture shock. I can guarantee that some of you will be bored shitless by this film, since it's 95% talking with very brief moments of gunfire. Now, if you can click with the characters, it's a completely different story. The characters are kind of interesting. They're not amazing. In fact, there's some painful cliches that pop up at times. But personally, they managed to hit a good middle ground between being complete cliches and having more under the surface. There's even moments of genuinely good dialogue.
Hey, you wouldn't want to blow yourself up. Chest wound is nature's way of saying, hey, you fucked up.
But I think this falls into the issue where you can tell this style is still pretty early, and you have a very traditional by-the-book filmmaker trying something different. But even 30 years later, you still have directors struggling to really get what you do with a found footage movie. The best ones feel as if you're watching some out-of-context compilation on Twitter or YouTube, something actually scrambled together out of whatever footage survived. Love it or hate it, Paranormal Activity, the first one, felt appropriate with this vibe. Like some Randy found a dead guy's camera and wanted to make a documentary out of what he found, though the best examples are, of course, Blair Witch and Wreck. Blair Witch barely had a script, and a lot of the scary scenes were the directors actually fucking with the actors when they were trying to sleep, so the reactions were real in a weird sort of way. Plus, it was a bunch of dumb film students in the woods, so they couldn't set up lights or cameras in a professional way. It looking so rough is the entire point of the movie. This is something Wreck especially excels at. Wreck is the 2007 Spanish film about a news crew going into an apartment complex with a team of firefighters, unaware they're stepping into a blossoming zombie outbreak. This is probably the top tier of the found footage style, in both what it wants to do and what it accomplishes. Wreck has such a chaotic, energetic tone that it really feels like you're watching a situation devolve, starting off slow and quiet to, by the end, a complete shit show. You can feel the difference between when the characters try to prep their shots and when they say fuck it and forget what they were even doing in the first place. It's a delicate balance between acknowledging there's a camera in the room and having characters actually push the plot forward regardless of who's watching. The bad found footage films run into the classic issue of why are they still recording, where the camera is rolling even after half the cast is dead and there isn't much of a reason to keep recording everything you're seeing. In fact, it's something that one of the Wreck sequels directly makes fun of. Sometimes it can be a petty complaint, since if the character is a journalist or a photographer, it would make sense they would want to document everything, but there's cases where it's blatantly an issue. The later Paranormal Activity sequels got pretty bad with that, where characters had, undisputable proof of supernatural activity recorded, saved on a computer, and they just don't tell anybody or show it to anyone, which raises the question of why even record in the first place? The point of evidence is that you show it to people. Don't even get me started on Diary of the Dead. Yeah, George Romero tried to make a found footage movie and it sucks. But 84 Charlie is in a unique position. Yeah, you can argue it looks too cinematic.
The camera is way too high quality to be something from the 1960s.
But then you remember the protagonist is literally a video journalist who's been specifically trained to capture footage in a war zone. So the answer to that question, why is he still recording, is because it's literally his job. The whole idea is he records everything he sees around him, even if shit gets violent. Now the big thing that definitely can't be excused is the acting. 84 Charlie's acting is a mixed bag. It's not completely awful, but it definitely doesn't feel natural or anything you'd hear from a group of soldiers if you just recorded their conversations. It still feels very dramatic and like a bunch of stage actors trying to emulate a group of soldiers. In all fairness, it is a hard goal to reach. You have to pretend that you're not pretending, and do it well enough to make the audience think they aren't watching something fake. Very few found footage movies can do it well, because you essentially have to break every single rule that's been trained into you as a filmmaker in order for the effect to work. In fact, it's one of the most common problems with this genre. There's too many shortcuts or there's something that's blatantly staged. But 84 Charlie especially struggles with this. MoPic's actor and his audio feel completely at odds with the goal of the film.
How long you been in country, fresh meat?
48 days down, 308 to go.
Where his acting is pretty stiff and he's blatantly ADR'd into the scene. So while other actors can at least get into a decent flow and bounce off each other, MoPic himself feels very out of place and alien. You might argue that's the point, to make him feel like an outsider. All I can think is that it's a fuck up. It's pretty distracting whenever he talks. Other than that, the film is decently well made, even with a lower budget. You can tell it doesn't have the most money to play with, but they're able to make it work, even if it is a tad slow or drawn out towards the middle. The sets are convincing enough, just kind of throwing everybody into the woods of California and dressing it up to somewhat look like Vietnam. The attire and weapons look accurate, and they save the money for the big fight at the end. Now, regards to how accurate it is to military culture, zero clue. I can guess this is probably one of those movies where if you watch it with somebody who used to be in the military, they'd lose their mind at all the small details. I have no room to talk on all this, since it's not based on a real event or actual battle to compare it to, so I can't just Google movie versus reality stuff and sound like an expert. No, it's a fake story, so all it has to rely on is emulating how soldiers would operate in a hypothetical situation, and that's up to your drunk uncle to critique. Some stuff sticks out as exceptionally wrong though, like I think it's just a law that any military movie or piece of media needs a scene where two guys in the unit threaten to shoot each other, even though everybody else would just beat the shit out of them for being idiots. Still, this is small detail stuff since every fucking war movie or show screws something up at some point. It's just the nature of things, because you have to break down huge events into a digestible format, and the way filmmaking works is making compromises just to get the damn thing out the door. Regardless, 84 Charlie is a very interesting film to check out. The story's not the strongest, you might think the characters are dry, but it's more about the experience of the movie itself, seeing one of the few found footage films that came out before the genre really formed into what we know of it today. Since even if that list I read off in the beginning of the video sounded long, there are so many more found footage movies that have come out since. It's insane. I'd recommend you guys to check this movie out, since it is pretty underappreciated, especially for a Vietnam film, but you'll have a hell of a time actually trying to find the fucking thing. One of the Subscribestar bros literally just sent me a zip file with the movie in it, so that's how I was able to watch it, but it's not available for streaming like anywhere. You can still buy DVDs of it, so it's not completely dead, and thankfully they're not price gouged to be like $300 a pop, and you can actually find the movie on YouTube, but it's crunched down to like 240p and it just looks awful. Bleh. So if you want to watch the movie, you're gonna have to find a torrent or pick up a physical DVD, which says a lot about our streaming society. Still, 84 Charlie was an enjoyable movie. I can't call it one of my all-time favorites for Vietnam films alone, that's a massive bar, but it's definitely something I'll recommend just for the sheer novelty of saying you know a movie that did found footage before The Last Broadcast and Blair Witch that isn't Cannibal Holocaust. Guarantee you'll impress some film student chick out there if you do. Still, it's time to wrap things up. Until next time, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys.
Shit's flaky or shit's flaky. You can make more noise than two skeletons fucking on a tin roof.
Using a soup can for rubber.
Hey, loser. Do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're going to be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's going to look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I am now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how you're not buying my shirt. They're going to plant crack in your house, and they're going to arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.